Welcome to the 12-Step Recovery Evolution podcast. Visit recoveryevolution.co.uk for more episodes, helpful resources and links to our social media. Also visit the site for information on how you can attend a future Zoom session or workshop live. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Fox, for the meeting. Obviously, thank you to Lester for inviting me. Yeah, really good subject, I suppose, because without coming to believe in a power greater than myself, I wouldn't have any sanity. I'd be repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and my life would be completely unmanageable, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today, and I wouldn't have any fruit in my life, and I'd probably be back in prison, and I'm just really grateful for that fact today. So I think it's important, quickly, just to those that, I'm not going to go on too much about my past, but I think it's important to identify and not try and run away from it, because it's a part of me. You know, my past is a part of me. Although I'm a new creation and I'm reborn through the 12 steps and my relationship with God, that part of me I still have, because it's important for the newcomer so that they can identify with it. So I think it's important to talk about, you know, without God in my life, this is kind of like, if I can paint a picture of what it was like, I'm going to try and do that as quickly as I can to move on to the better bit. But, you know, in addiction, without God in my life, I had no peace. I was separated through sin. You know, I had no love in my heart. My mind was just absolutely destroyed and chaotic. My life was chaotic. I harmed everyone that loved me, including myself. I was a nuisance on the streets. I tore my community apart. I had police after me all the time. I failed in relationships miserably. You know, as a result of addiction, I ended up nearly dying a couple of times. I was stabbed by someone in addiction. I ended up on Crime Watch. I ended up with a long list of offences, as long as my body. And this is really just to glorify the power of God, because without him, that's the result. You know, my life running on self-will, the book says we're like tornadoes roaring through the lives of others. And I can just so identify with that statement, you know, that is so true. And you can be like that in recovery as well. Like, I suppose, like, you know, you can become what I've witnessed in others, you know, that you can end up harming people in recovery. You know, you can sleep around, you know, you can get drawn into pornography. People can cut corners and start stealing, you know, and I've witnessed that. So again, it's so important for me to you know, to maintain this relationship with God, you know. And I think, like, in addiction, you know, I was just always in that insanity, you know. I was always in the obsession, and I was always trying to evade my responsibility and my reality, and I just didn't know how to live, you know. I didn't have any power in my life, and my life was, like I said, it was just completely unmanageable. And it just brought me to my knees, you know. The drugs that I used were Class A heroin and crack cocaine and diazepam, and I was a street junkie, you know. That's where it led me, and it was just pitiful with a capital P, and I ended up on the streets of London begging for money, and that's kind of where addiction took me. There was a progression, you know, obviously from a very young lad, but that's the result of my condition that I suffer from, and thankfully, you know, I can see that God's grace has always been in my life. I can now see my reality, that I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing this shit. I should be dead. You know, I really shouldn't be here. I was so sick. I can just see that God's grace carried me through, and that he had a plan for my life, and I just didn't know he did, and I didn't know that he loved me, and I didn't know that he existed, and to be honest, I didn't really want to know them. I was just so entrenched in darkness. But thankfully, I arrived at East Coast Recovery, like a lot of you did. We went to the treatment centre, and I began this process of recovery. And I think, like, when I look back, even on the beginning of my journey, you know, these are the symptoms that I had. See, the drink and the drugs were just the symbol. But the symptoms of my condition were that I was full of fear, I was angry, I was full of self-pity, I was paranoid, I was depressed, and I was, like I say, I was just separated from God. And I had no love in my heart, and my mind just felt like a war zone. It felt like just like World War III was going off in my head. Like there was just literally cluster bombs going off in my head, and I had no peace of mind. I had no serenity. So I went through the process, you know, and I can remember sitting in the group rooms in early treatment, and I can remember, like, there was this little bit in the big book that stood out to me quite early on, and it said, when we feel fear, we ask God to remove it and direct our attention to who he would have us be. And then we commence to outgrow fear. And that, even then, because I was so full of fear, I was so desperate to get out of myself then. And I didn't realise I was looking for release. I was kind of like looking for relief still early on. And I just couldn't stand being in my own skin. But I was just so full of fear, and I didn't know what I was frightened of. I couldn't even identify how frightened I was back then, but I can see clearly that I was just so full of fear, and so full of doubt, so full of insecurity. And it's been like a process. And I suppose that I came to a decision to give myself over to the care of God as I understood him back then, because I was just so desperate. And I just didn't want to feel the way I did anymore. And I suppose I was just seeking freedom, you know, and I was seeking release. You know, I never knew about God's love. I never knew about grace. I never knew about forgiveness or like joy or love or abundance, you know. But I started to form this relationship as like mad as I was, and as childlike as I was, and as scatty. I just started to pray, you know, and I started to seek. And in the big book, it talks about that when on awakening, we think about it 24 hours ahead. And these simple little suggestions, I started to practice them. It was like I almost can remember thinking like I was like in an army camp, and I was being trained up. And I needed to understand that my life and my thinking has caused me carnage, so I need to like hand this thinking over to the care of whatever it was then, you know. And I kind of like the concept of the universe. I kind of like the concept that everything's in synchronicity, and I kind of like the concept of my dad was looking over me, because my dad had died when I was in addiction. So all those things. And I think, like, I remember hearing this phrase in the group room, which said, when an addict works with another addict for the purpose of recovery, it creates this power. And I can now see that that's an agreement between one peer and another, and you both come in agreement, and this power is created. And I can just identify that as God today. And kind of like speaking to the right people, you know, there was a power greater than myself. Sitting in a group room listening to people's step work, that was a power greater than myself, you know. And I think even early doors, doing the right thing, that is a power greater than myself, because I always did the wrong thing. So Ricky doing the right thing, even small things like picking up my rubbish, you know, folding my clothes up, putting them in my wardrobe in my room that I was in, little things like that, because I didn't know how to live. And I literally just got schooled and trained, and I literally learned from, like, I was just at the bottom, you know. I was like just at the complete barrel at the bottom, and that's just rock bottom for me. And I just started to slowly learn how to live. And I think God just performed a miracle in my life, and he just literally resuscitated me. It was like he just performed a heart transplant and pumped me back to life through his breath. and that was just slow and gradual. And I think, like, you know, as you go along, your mind begins to open more. And so, like, my relationship with God is like, it's changed and evolved through time. And I think for me, like, I remember in the big book, it said there's something that more than human power is needed for this psychic change to occur. You know, me trying to adhere to them steps, I failed miserably. I can't practice principles in all my affairs. Me on my own willpower, I failed at, you know. But with God, all things are possible, you know. And I think, like, you know, since when you do form this relationship with God, you start to have this conscious about yourself. You start to become aware, and you wake up, and you start to kind of like turn away from the things that you know aren't good for you. Well, that's my personal experience anyway. And the things that I used to watch as well, you know, really just horrible things early doors. And I think God just slowly molds you and changes your heart. He renews your mind. And then, you know, you start to become aware and wake up. And in the big book, it says that, you know, we've got like a new employer. Being all powerful, provided what we need when we stick close to him, perform his work well. And I think, like, I couldn't identify where God was. I was always looking outside of myself, like looking at the flowers, at the universe, thinking of that stuff, you know. And then I realised, I read this bit in the big book, and it said deep down in every man, woman and child is the fundamental idea of God. And I started to focus on that. So then I started to improve my prayer life. And I think praying is like setting an intention. And it's also like forming this, through communication, you're forming this intimate relationship with a God as you understand. And then I think through listening, through meditation, that's attention. So it's intention and attention. And I think, like, as you go along, you start to hear God's voice, because it's a still voice. It ain't someone that shouts. My mind sounds like an angry ogre. So I know that ain't him speaking. You know, I know God is a very soft, quiet voice, and he just guides you, you know, and directs you. And also God convicts as well. You know, if I'm thinking wrong thoughts, or I'm thinking of doing something wrong, God will convict me, and I'll get a feeling or a voice, you know, and it will say, you shouldn't do that, Ricky. That's, yeah, don't go down that path. Don't go this way, go that way. So kind of like, I look at God now as like a guide and a director. And he's like my boss, you know, and through his spirit that he instructs me, you know, and tells me like basically what's good for me, what's not good for me. And I think, like, some people often like say, you know, what is it that you get out of a relationship with God, you know? And I always say, look, what do you get out of a relationship with God? I'll tell you what you get. And I'll tell you what you lose. You lose ego, you lose anger, you lose depression, you lose paranoia, you lose fear, you lose sickness, your belief systems change. You know, the corrupted thoughts get took away, root and branch. And you know, and God just delivers you and heals you. And that's been my experience. You know, I had a lump growing in my throat, and I thought I was dying of throat cancer when I stopped smoking. And I went and had this lump removed, and then it was horrific going through that, you know. But I applied my faith and I trusted in God through that process, and it turned out to be an innocent fluid, you know. And I do really strongly believe in my heart that I was healed from that, you know. And there's a bit in the doctor's opinion that says that about us returning to health, that it's a miracle, that God's performed a miracle. If you're sitting on this meeting today, you're a miracle. If you're sitting on this meeting without your head racing, telling you need to use, God's already performed a miracle in your mind, because he's restored some sanity into your mind where the drink and drugs are concerned. You know, and I can remember for the first 8 weeks in recovery to 6 months, my mind raced, you know, and it was uncontrollable. But something happened to me, you know, and I remember like quite clearly that I was in the back of this service on a Sunday in a local church, and I can remember praying and crying, because I was just still, the 12 steps modified me, you know, and I began my beautiful amends with my kids and stuff. And and I went through a process, but I still felt like there was something missing, and I couldn't describe what it was. But I can remember I cried out desperately, and I felt something, this power flow through me, like it was like electric. It was like just pure love, and literally everything that I was holding on to, which I had on my back, like a backpack of just pure and utter mess and chaos, I felt it just lift up out of me, and I felt this pure love radiating through me like I've never felt in my life. And all my tears stopped rolling, and I just felt full of contentment, full of love, full of grace and compassion, you know. And it was like someone was holding me to the right of me, and I didn't want to look up because didn't feel worthy to look up, and this light was just shining through me. And I remember running back to the houses and telling my old key worker, and he just said, "Ricky, whatever's happened to you, you need to hold on to that." You know, and that was like nearly 5 years ago. Just had some amazing experiences in recovery, walking with God. You know, I think like there's this phrase that I like. It said, "We've got to pay the bill to keep the light on." You know, like, and I see like, look, we've all got the power of God within us all, but you got to flip the switch. You got to turn it on. You know, if you're not turning that switch on, you're going to just be rendered powerless. You know, you're going to be unmanageable. You're going to be prone to resentment and fear and anger. You're going to just be fumbling around in the darkness. You know, and I like this phrase is about so electricity. Yeah, it flows to our homes and it's generated by power stations, isn't it? And then from there, it goes through these like large transmissions, and it carries into these substations, and then finally that gets distributed into our homes and schools, blah 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 blah. So, but when the power comes into our homes, it ain't just going to turn lights on. We have to flip that switch, and I think that's a pure, really good how to sum up God. You know, that power is flowing in me. It's in me, but I need to flip the switch. I need to turn it on. You know what? I've been through quite a bit in recovery, you know, and my experience it's not a straight path. It has its difficulties. You know, there's snares and traps along the way. There's people that try and lure you off the path. There's people that can curse you. You know, there's things that happen in my life that are out of my control. But you know what? I'm a firm believer in that we've all got the power and authority to talk into any situation. We can overcome everything, you know, even sickness. I believe that in my heart, you know, and I've witnessed that, and I've seen it, and I've experienced it myself. And you know, like, and I kind of, God has just shaped me and molded me as I've gone along. And I kind of, like, the last month or so, I've just took my son on full time, which is such a blessing. I mean, he's 6 years of age, and he's just me all over. And I think God's just given me what I need when I need it. And I've just kind of just, as I go along, God just adds things. And I suppose, like, when I'm ready and it's in his time, you know. And yeah, God's blessed me. You know, I've learned to drive. I've got educated. I've got really good friends. I'm due to get married next year. I've got a really wonderful lady in my life. She's good as gold. My children are beautiful. I've got a lovely family. Part of a wicked little ministry that's off and running in Lowestoft, which some of you know about. And you know what? Just the journey continues. And it just unfolds. Even this morning, you know, that I haven't changed anything from day dot. You know, my relationship with God hasn't changed. It's just evolved as I've gone along, and I've become a lot more obedient. And things that I used to kind of like, things that I'll just let people get away with, or certain ideas and things that I would talk about, I don't entertain anymore. That I think, like, you know, I think having a relationship with God, sometimes he will tell you to, like, you know, prompt people if they're going on the wrong path. Confrontation, I used to hide from that, but today I don't. You know, I face things head on, and I've just grown up, I suppose, and that, I think that's really knowing God is knowing your heart and what's good for you and what He wants for you, and not just running off doing what you want to do. And that's a really good bit of information that I've learned. I'm going to be careful not to rabbit on now, but I'm just going to stop sharing and just say that, you know, God is all powerful and He's there at your disposal, and it's more about what you can do for God rather than what He can do for you. And at the beginning, you sort of would do these little flare prayers of help me, you know, and these little flare prayers would go up. But as you go along, you will start to form this relationship, and it will become intimate. And He just loves us all, you know. We're like His children, and He's like this father. That's the way I look at it. And He just loves us, and He just wants the best for us, and He's got a plan for each and every one of you. And I hope you're all well and staying safe, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.